Well, welcome to the ICRS COP26 Learning Hub podcast. We are 2 days post COP26, and today we're very much going to be talking about initial reflections on the conference and what we've all been hearing about. I'm Gemma Branney, I'm Global Head of ESG for a STEM Specialist Staffing Group S3, and I'm also the co-chair of the ICRS Scotland Hub. I'm delighted to be welcoming Robbie onto our podcast today. Robbie, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name's Robbie Epsom. I'm the EMEA head of ESG at CBRE Investment Management. Previously CBRE Global Investors. We rebranded just recently. Joined the beginning of the year, so I'm still fairly new. Joined in January to help launch our sustainability vision and strategy, which we've just been working hard this year to roll out across the business. But background in sustainability consultancy and trained as a chemical process engineer. So I've got about 12 years experience in sustainability consulting, which gives me quite a nice view across the economy. And importantly to this conversation, I've just got back from COP26 and the sort of the buzz of the atmosphere that's been going up in Glasgow.
Super. So you did come up to COP, but tell us a little bit about how was COP26 and why did you attend? What were your reasons for coming up for the conference?
Yeah, so I was, I was actually there with several hats, but the main reason for going, I was in the Blue Zone, was because I was representing West London Business, which is a non-profit based in London that represents businesses both large and small, so particularly on the SME side in West London. And I started as their industry sort of lead for investor ESG sector, and then actually got moved to the delegation lead for West London Business. So in my formal capacity, I was representing them in the Blue Zone. And I was there for the first week, so arrived on the World Leaders Day and was there through to Built Environments and Cities Day towards the end of the week. And again, it was there very much representing those SMEs, those clean tech SMEs in London, and really trying to kind of network and help progress things in terms of West London businesses' aims and objectives. But obviously, second hat, as CBRE Investment Management, as a business engaging and networking with all the people at COP, both in the Blue Zone, also the Green Zone, and with all the sort of periphery kind of fringe events that were going on all across Glasgow. So a really busy week, and yeah, sad I couldn't stay for the whole 2 weeks, but I don't think I would have survived the long days that you put into things like COP.
Yeah, it was great to see a buzz around the city and a lot of amazing events happening. Obviously now, we heard snippets of announcements throughout the 2 weeks of COP and saw various conversations and where that was going. The media have been very focused on the Glasgow Pact for the past 2 days, and quite a lot of focus on the wording that was included in the Glasgow Pact. Do you think we can decarbonise fast enough with the pact that's been agreed at COP26 and the various pledges that have been made?
Yeah, I think if you look at I think the IEA did an assessment which was announced actually towards the end of that first week, where they basically recalculated the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, many of which were updated in the kind of days before COP26. And they felt that, if the Glasgow Pact and the kind of pledges that had been made up to that point were adhered to, that we were looking more like 1.8, which is an improvement, obviously still not enough. And I think the overarching message in the media is that COP didn't go far enough, and I think it's important to sort of challenge that to some extent. I think the media, the activists, have a really important role. They're almost like the opposition in the sort of parliamentary process of really challenging the process. Are you doing enough? Really making sure they're pushing things on, and they've played a fantastic part when it comes to changing that consumer behaviour, which obviously is the end point for many of these businesses and obviously the politicians in terms of elections and things like that. So they've had a really great role. But I think to flip it to a more positive outcome, it has done a huge amount to move the agenda forwards. It's not enough, but it's a big step forwards. And the big thing is that it's pulled countries together in terms of actually accepting collectively for the first time really that they understand the science, and the urgency of the situation. But what it really has done, because of that agreement under the Glasgow Pact, is it's signaled to business that this is the direction things are heading, and business likes to move ahead of regulation, ahead of policy. So that's, in my view, one of the most successful things that the Glasgow Pact has done, and that wasn't on the agenda from what I understand at the beginning of COP. So the Glasgow Pact was something that was a sort of package deal that came in almost as a little bit of a surprise towards the end. So my personal view is that it's a positive thing. It's a shame that we saw, the phase out of coal changing to the phase down, but all the language in there is collective, it's kind of unanimous, and it's saying that we understand that things need to be done. And there are countries that are going to be at different stages in that, and that's the whole debate and the conversation around the just transition, and that's a hugely complex sort of discussion point. But in my view, it's a positive thing. And I think if I summed up COP26 in one way, is it's the COP where the kind of real economy, the business world, turned up for the first time. And that to me is one of the most positive things. The real stuff that happens in the economy, the products we all buy, the services we all sign up to, that is businesses. And we need businesses to change if we're going to get real change. And they were there, CEOs, technology leaders, people were doing business at COP. And the Glasgow Pact, I think, is the kind of, it's the key message that this is not going away, and they need to get on with this. And hopefully by the next COP, those next steps are taken when it comes to things like phasing out coal and really starting to increase the language around loss and damage and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, obviously, COP being in my hometown, reflecting with some friends who were able to attend, the corporate presence at COP definitely felt like a step change that we hadn't seen before, and it's something that I think has been commented on by quite a few people who were there, to see that, like you see, the kind of economic presence, and businesses will potentially have the ability to move a little bit faster than governments on that. So today we're really talking to sustainability managers, to people who are on the ground in companies, trying to push forward that sustainability agenda. What do you think are the biggest challenges that are going to face companies on their net zero transition?
I think one of the big things I took from COP is that there's a nervousness around that lack of kind of guidance and consistency when it comes to the assumptions that businesses are making, the various claims that are going out there. And I think that nervousness almost acts as a bit of a hindrance when it comes to getting committed to things like net zero, whatever it might be. That it's a big thing, and for businesses, these big promises carry a lot of risk. So there's that balance now of, do you get started? Do you move? Do you look at your sort of feasibility first? And a lot of companies, particularly the large complex ones, are really trying to work out how best to approach this. And I think the big message that was coming out of COP to business was just get started and be honest and transparent. This is not going to be perfect. Businesses will make mistakes, but just be honest and transparent about the process you're following, the steps you're taking. And I think what will really help in terms of that sort of methodology and getting consistency and confidence in terms of going out there with, the transition plans that you will have heard Rishi Sunak talking about, is things like the Science-Based Target Initiative net zero criteria, which again was launched in the run up to COP, and that provides a global framework for net zero. So we all start speaking the same language. So if one business goes out to say, I'm going to be net zero by this date, they know, if it's SBTI aligned and validated, that that is kind of like for like comparisons, and it starts to kind of encourage the market. And I think maybe just to add on that one point, because I think the SBTI is a good example of another benefit of COP, is that it acted as a kind of line in the sand or a goal for a lot of positive things that happened before we even got to COP. And so, we mustn't forget all the great stuff that happened pre-COP, which is things like SBTI going, we are going to get our new net zero criteria ready before COP so we can talk about it at COP. Well, Green Building Council included Scope 3 greenhouse gas accounting in terms of embodied carbon in their guidance, and that again got updated. So there were a lot of things across all of our sectors which will really have helped in-house sustainability managers to start to really put in place processes, which means they can confidently start to get those targets and those transition plans developed and be very transparent about it and comfortable that the rest of the economy is kind of singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yeah, definitely. And it was, I think the SBTI net zero framework is such a welcome standard to help all of us standardise what does net zero actually mean, and what are those targets, and gives a little bit more accountability, I think, also to businesses. I think what's quite interesting is one of the things that I think you've commented on there, and reflecting on some of the pre-COP events which were taking place, is that it's starting to feel much more like we're in it together, and actually the net zero transition of one company isn't actually just reliant on that one company. It's about the industry, the supply chain, as all moving to net zero as one economy. Which I think
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that was the buzz, you know, when people talk about the buzz at COP26, was that sense of collaboration, putting aside the fact, you know, it was obviously very sad to see some of the great work in the Glasgow Pact sort of taking those sort of steps back towards the end. But I think, you know, people can understand why that happened. You know, in the situation countries like India are in, and again, that comes back to that just transition discussion. But on the whole, it was very positive. You know, the language there wasn't kind of doom and gloom. It was like, let's make this an opportunity. Let's collaborate. We're all in this together. Let's see this as a new industrial revolution. Think about what technology we can create. Think about this as the behavioural change, you know, the positive things. And you know, humanity, you know, if you look into our history, have been doing this. Isn't a recent thing for humanity. The sort of trends that we've been doing, it goes way back past the Industrial Revolution in terms of our kind of friction with biodiversity and nature. And so this is an opportunity, and I think COP is that turning point. Paris really set the foundations. Glasgow moved us forwards on the how, not far enough, but enough to send that really strong signal to business that we need to start collaborating on this. And I think, to your point, the nervousness again when it comes to those in-house sustainability managers is that indirect bit of their business, the scope 3 in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, where they don't have control. It's their supply chain, their value chain up and downstream. But what COP26 really shows is that we are all working on this. So our suppliers, whether they're upstream, whether they're downstream customers, whatever it might be, are all starting to work on this. So we're, you know, this is a team effort. The grid is doing it. We're doing it in our own core business, and as our, you know, our kind of investors, as well as our tenants and occupiers, if we're taking our business as an example. So it's a collaborative effort. And I think the only other point I'd add is this was on the media. You know, your everyday people who aren't in sustainability. This was headline news almost every day. It wasn't like the Paris Agreement where it was that kind of end bit that kind of made the headlines. You know, COP was in the headlines before COP started. All through COP26, all the announcements were scrutinized, discussed, debated by people, you know, way out of the ESG sustainability sector. So that's, again, this is now on the agenda across the whole economy, which is brilliant.
Yeah, I've really liked that actually. At S3, we did a pledge wall around one thing that you can change to be more sustainable personally. And it was amazing actually seeing some of the innovation that people were coming up with themselves in their own life and lifestyle. And actually, as a result of COP, I've noticed both of my children coming home from school and even nursery school with COP26 learning, and my 4-year-old lecturing me on turning off the light and closing the door to keep the house warm, which is just, you know, like you say, it's a catalyst that changes behaviour as well as kind of corporate strategy. What would you say from COP26? What would you say were your 3 biggest takeaways from the conference?
I think, I mean, I know I've said it already, but I think it has to be that COP26 was the first COP where the kind of real economy, or the, you know, turned up, or you know, you could see it as the sort of business COP. And I think that's so important. I feel, you know, coming from the business world, I feel very strongly that we need businesses to change. You know, your major companies are, if we're being honest, you know, they're like small countries, some of them. The big thing with corporates is they transcend borders in the way that politics can't. So if you can get businesses on you know, the agenda of this and really changing, you know, you take your massive ones that might be based in the US or Western Europe, their supply chains, their value chains, they spread across the world. So if you can get things like net zero and other things embedded into their thinking at the sort of board level, that transcends borders in a way that politics just can't, you know, even when you get things like the Glasgow Pact. So for me, that signal that the Glasgow Pact sent to business, which is, look at this kind of unanimous view that this is the way things are heading. It might not be heading there fast enough in that political language, but the very fact that every country there is nodding that this is what we need to do. Some of them are saying we need to do it a bit slower because of whatever reason it might be. But on the whole, business is looking at it going, we need to get ahead of this now. And that's the real positive outcome for me in terms of COP26, as well as I think on the other side is that, you know, you can talk to someone who has no background in sustainability, and they know what COP26 is, and even that is a positive in itself. So this firmly made sustainability, mainstream in terms of conversation. Sustainability went mainstream in terms of business, I'd say back in 2019, 2020, and it suddenly jumped into the boardroom. COP26 and the build up and the during and probably the follow up has very much made it language that is now understood in the household. And that again is really powerful, because at the end of the day, we will have the ability to vote with our wallets as consumers, and for everyone to understand these things, even if they, like businesses, they don't get it perfectly, but they start asking those questions and challenging when they make those spying sort of decisions. That's really powerful. So I think COP's been really powerful on those two sides, despite the slightly lower ambition of the Glasgow Pact. But I think equally there've been some great things that came out of it. The halting and reversing deforestation by 2030. I think that's upwards of over 130 countries now who have committed to that. That's a big thing, both in terms of biodiversity and also obviously in terms of tackling climate change. And then obviously, very relevant to our sector is that commitment around the GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance on Net Zero, around that 130 trillion, which you heard again pushed around. And that kind of just reinforces the fact that business understands that this is now an opportunity to sort of to lean on. This is no longer seen as a problem and a risk and something which they kind of want to go away. This is now, we want to be part of this transition. There's opportunities here to really make a difference. And for our sector in terms of real assets, you look to Europe, something like 75% of the buildings in Europe are energy inefficient at the moment, and 85 to 90% plus of them are still going to be here in 2050. So that transition is an opportunity for companies like us, and all the other sectors will be seeing similar things in terms of new products for consumers that are better thought out, designed for end of life in mind, all that sort of stuff. This is a really exciting sort of transition. But all in all, in my view, positive step. But I think it's the business and consumer behaviour understanding that's the big thing, and getting countries aligned behind the Glasgow Pact. And the next COP now needs to strengthen that. And I think only final thought, so much happens, sorry, it keeps coming to mind, is just pushing to get the NDCs updated by the next COP in 2022. And that's really pushing countries to go away and think about their nationally determined contributions and come back before the next COP in a year's time to really start to push that again. So I think we're into almost more of an annual cycle now of iterative improvements and steps forward, which is absolutely right, given that we've only got 9 years left of this critical decade.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. I remember being in a COP event back, it must have been at least 12 to 18 months ago, and it was the COP26 champion was talking about the focus on COP is going to be short term. What are we doing today? Not what do we need to do by 2050, but what's actually going to be happening, more immediate action. And actually, on that basis, the event has been a success, because we are seeing targets that are more short term, and like you say, more short term actions and commitments, which is a real positive to see. And I think something as business that we are also having to really think about, making a net zero plan or making a net zero target for 2050 is something that most of us will no longer be in our jobs at that point. It's not relevant to us, but actually we need to start moving the dial right now, with this being such a critical decade. I'm going to throw in it. And you go.
I was going to say, I think on that point exactly around that, the transition plans and leaving it to 2050, because like you say, many of us won't be, potentially still working there, and those long-term plans very rarely stay as they're intended. So one of the tangible things is that the number of net zero targets, particularly those that are science-based, aligned through things like the SBTI, just rose exponentially in the run-up to COP. So the last 6 months has seen a phenomenal percentage. I'm pretty sure I saw somewhere it's getting up to something like 60% plus of kind of GDP in terms of coverage of those companies, but I'm not going to quote any official numbers there. But it was a big rise in the last 6 months, and that again was driven by COP. And I think many in the surveys that have been carried out are saying that they will be doing will be setting theirs over the next 2 or 3 months. So there's a big shift in that tangible action. And what's great again that came out of COP is that requirements in the UK, at least, for those transition plans to be scrutinised. But like you said, within all of that, it requires that short near-term target, not just the 2050 target. So we're moving towards much shorter term action by the end of this decade, as well as that longer term plan. So I think, yeah, you're right. That shift is kind of the tangible thing, but it's moving away from just talking about 2050, which is very much kicking it down the road.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to be really cheeky, Robbie, and throw in an extra question I've not prepped you for. If we're speaking to an Institute of Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability member who is very at the beginning of their journey in terms of sustainability, what piece of advice would you give them?
It's a really difficult one, because I think the kind of the way careers used to work would be, you'd try and get your degree and get as much experience as you can, do a master's or whatever it might be. But I would say, and I'm sure you'd echo this coming from your sector, that we just need people in the workplace ASAP. So, for me, it's ESG, sustainability, is such a broad thing now. I mean, almost whatever your passion is, you can probably find an ESG or sustainability themed version of it somewhere in the economy. So I think, people that want to get involved with sustainability don't have to just go into, something that's very specific. You can almost go into anything and just become someone who's a, sustainability expert to it. But I would just say that it's not worth doing long PhDs and masters at the moment, by all means, but it's almost worth getting in as quickly as you can, because people need boots on the ground in sustainability at the moment. And almost doing, if you do feel like doing a master's or something, doing it part-time, or further down the line, because I reckon, and again, I can't be quoted on this, but I wouldn't be surprised when a lot of businesses support masters if it just means they can get people in the door, because we're very resource constrained in the sustainability world. There's a lot more sustainability and ESG challenges than there are people who are able to support with them at the moment. So the sooner we can get people in, the better. It's a booming sector, and definitely one people should focus on coming out of school.
Yeah, definitely. It's I think that's one of my reflections, actually, if I could talk to myself as an 18-year-old, is around that kind of lifelong learning journey when you work in this type of industry and career. What even existed when I first graduated from university to what's in play today are very different. So that need to kind of personal development, and like you say, you don't need to know all the answers. You can learn on the job, and I think that's been one of the great things about the ICRS is the learning tools that are available, but also other places that you can be signposted to around, like the TCFD Knowledge Hub, for example, is a great resource to upskill. So it is, yeah, I think sometimes there's a nervousness that when you come in to be the sustainability manager, you must know everything about sustainability, but the on-the-job learning is something that I think, all of us are going to be doing to the end of our career.
Yeah, and people shouldn't be scared of becoming, it can always feel overwhelming, I think, becoming an in-house sustainability person, because it is such a broad topic. But, you are supported by experts across the board, not just in sustainability, but, the various other things. And, people are just very glad to have proactive, hardworking people who are passionate about sustainability. A lot of it can be learnt on the job these days. And so I just encourage people to get into the industries as quickly as possible, and continue, if they want to do further education, to continue it almost in parallel, or even a little bit further down the line once they've got that experience, because anyone who's smart, passionate about sustainability, they're in high demand at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. Super. Well, thank you so much, Robbie, for joining our podcast and giving some insights into what was happening at COP26. I'm sure we will be hearing more and seeing more over the coming weeks around what this means for the sector. And the ICRS Knowledge Hub is there for everyone to kind of upskill and learn a bit more around sustainability and some of the topics that were coming up at COP. But thank you so much for joining me today.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me.